so villains. Tell us about what are we experiencing here on Phyrexia?
Hello, everyone. This is Donald Trump, hopefully your favorite president of all time.
Yeah, and we've also, we've got some familiar faces.
Better than Lincoln, better than Washington.
That one makes me sad. It's gorgeous, but it makes me sad.
They're called Trump Digital Trading Cards.
This set is just chock full of horrific Phyrexia. This one's going to give me nightmares.
These cards feature some of the really incredible artwork pertaining to my life and my career. It's been very exciting.
I'm just going to keep saying it. This one's going to give me nightmares. This one's we're not. There is one piece of art that is like all teeth that we're not showing today. I'll talk about it when we get to preview season. That just it gets me every time.
Bing, bing, bong, bong, bing, bing, bing.
He's talking to Mike at the volume. What's your plan to speak for the rest of the episode, just so I can check levels real quick?
This is the volume.
Okay, cool.
Okay, great.
I think it's pretty good.
Excellent.
Well, in that case, let's start the show. Hello and welcome to Lucky Paper Radio. My name is Andy, and I'm here, as always, with my co-host Anthony, Graph Maker Maddox.
Yep, guilty.
Are people going to argue and say it was chart? Graph chart. What's
graph?
Is one a superset of the other?
I don't want to talk about it. It doesn't matter. Are you communicating effectively? Then don't worry about it.
You set up some bulk import stuff from Scryfall just so you could quickly spin up mildly alarming graphs about how much magic has been printed in the past couple years?
Yeah, I'd worked on setting up some stuff to work with bulk data a couple weeks ago. Somebody had a question in a Discord that I was curious about. So now I've got all this stuff set up, and I had another question. Magic Data Science did a very alarming tweet suggesting the number of cards or the amount of rules text that have been printed in the last couple of years, and I wanted to see a little bit more about that.
Basically hockey sticked is what the graph suggested.
Graph, what did it look like over time? And it looks insane. The amount of rules text that has been printed in the last 2 years is nuts. I would say it's off the charts.
So anyway, you corroborated it with your own independent research.
Correct. Yeah, you gotta do your own research.
Yeah. Well, we love it for all the graphs you make, or charts, or whatever you want to call them. We're back to doing normal episodes. I say normal in the sense that we're just going to be talking about cubes. This week, we're going to be talking about... It's almost a follow-up from last week's episode. You know, I thought about all the things we talked about last week and was just like, yeah, I'm going to add some more Baneslayer-y creatures to my Bun Magic Cube. And so I've got a selection of those, which we're going to talk about. We're also going to do a pack one pick one from your listener-submitted cube. It's been too long. This week's cube comes to us from listener Pino, and it is a cube that was originally started so that he could play with his partner, and basically it's kind of like, a little more lackadaisically updated. Maybe just, let the cards sit for a while in standard, update it whenever you get around to it, which is a nice chill attitude I respect in cube design.
Yeah, it seems like a fun cube, and it sounds like they play it all the time.
We got the pack in front of us. I will read the cards out. Anthony, you're going to tell us what you are thinking of taking. Pack one, pick one. The pack is Law Rune Enforcer, Restoration Angel, Thieving Skydiver, Bloodstained Mire, Angel of Invention, Tireless Tracker. A Tireless Tracker I didn't even know existed. It's Secret Lair, I suppose.
Yeah, it's a little Secret Lair Gilded Baron Tireless Tracker. I love it.
Woe Strider, Godless Shrine, Graven Cairns, Sylvan Caryatid, Earthshaker Kenra, Sacred Foundry, Paradise Druid, Spectral Procession, and Hopeful Initiate. What's it going to be, Anthony?
I think it's going to be hard to put me off of the fetch land and just take Bloodstained Mire here.
I agree. Let's go to the second pick then.
Okay, great.
I mean, let's briefly, every episode is someone's first episode. You know how the saying goes. So why do you like taking a fetch land first in this pack with really powerful cards like Restoration Angel and Tireless Tracker?
I mean, a fetch land is extremely flexible just because obviously it can fetch, this one can fetch a mountain or a swamp, but because we have stuff like Godless Shrine, it means this can fetch all kinds of colors when you pair it with your shock lands, your fetchable lands, and starting with such an open pick that just means, I'm not committing to necessarily even two colors. I'm just going to make my deck work a lot more consistently before I really know what's going to be open at the table.
Yeah, if you take a Bloodstained Mire first and assume you're going to draft a two-color deck, and you also assume you're not going to do any of the sort of really greedy splashing where, like, your Bloodstained Mire fixes for blue-green because you have a black-blue land and a green-red land. If you just are fetching typed lands, Bloodstained Mire goes in 7 of the 10 guilds. Yep. So it's a really, really open pick. There's no colorless cards in this pack, so it is by far the most open pick we could possibly have. And on top of that, fetch lands are really good. They're among the best ways to fix your mana. So I agree with you. Bloodstained Mire is the pick for me. What's your pick after Bloodstained Mire?
I'm not quite sure. There's a couple cards that stand out to me after that. They do include Tireless Tracker, as well as Restoration Angel and Earthshaker Kenra. I'm not really sure between those where I would go next. I think it kind of just depends on, a lot on the context, of course, which I haven't played this cube yet, and just what you feel like doing that night.
I think I'm on Tireless Tracker personally.
Okay.
This is actually kind of pertinent to our discussion later on in the episode, but I wish there were more 3-drops that played like Tireless Tracker, that had the kinds of patterns where it gets some value over time, so it's like not a huge blowout or whatever to get it removed. If you time it so you get your first clue out of it, then at least you get the card back. But the value is also largely in the body because it also gets bigger over time, and that is like, to me, it's like the exact perfect balance of what I think a 3-drop should be, the ideal 3-drop. Restoration Angel, definitely powerful, but I'm happier to start on a cheaper mana value card, and I think those two are kind of well above the power level of the pack. If you could argue maybe like a Paradise Druid, potentially. I guess I don't know how many artifacts are in the cube. Thieving Skydiver, if there are a ton of cheap artifacts, can become very potent. But yeah, without having played the cube before, I think it's Tireless Tracker for me.
It would be a lot of fun to take a Restoration Angel here and then wheel Spectral Procession and just play mono white. Spectral Procession is a card.
That's a non-bow, though.
I know, but I'm just thinking like this. It's Spectral Procession is a card that I don't get to play in a lot of cubes, so it would be pretty cool to do that. But yeah, I think I'm with you on Tireless Tracker. But, what would be really great is you take the Bloodstained Mire and then wheel the Tireless Tracker. I don't think that's going to happen, but...
Yeah, if that happens, I'll be thrilled and pretty sure that green is open. Well, thank you, Pino, for sending in your Coma Cube so we could do a Pack 1 Pick 1 from it on the show. If you want to be just like Pino, we have a form on our website you can fill out. It's linked in all of the show notes for our episodes where you can submit your cube, and then it's selected semi at random based on a algorithm that Anthony wrote.
I like graphs, I like algorithms, I like all kinds of nerd stuff. What can I say?
You might say that an AI is choosing which cube we're going to do a Pack 1 Pick 1 from each week.
I would not. I would say a weighted dice roll is choosing the Pack 1 Pick 1. It's actually pretty simple.
Anthony, what really is the difference between a weighted dice roll and an AI at the end of the day? There's just a lot of weighted dice rolls.
Okay.
Well, Anthony, I'm going to add some new cards to the Bun Magic Cube. I'm going to cut some other cards. And I feel like we haven't done just like a nuts and bolts talk about cube changes episode in a long time. And I have not decided what I'm actually going to add yet. I made a little grid of cards that I'm considering adding to the cube, and I shared it on our Twitter account for Lucky Paper, in the MTG Cube Talk Discord, and in the Discord for our playgroup. So I shared it in all those different places, and I asked everyone to tell me what among those cards were, in their opinion, the 3 most powerful, and the 3 least powerful, and the 3 most fun, and the 3 least fun. This is a thing I kind of like stole from Ryan Sachs. Ryan Sachs does this on Twitter all the time, and I can totally see why he did it now, because getting these answers back, I think, was really illuminating for me. They did not at all match my expectations, really. Do these results, which we'll put in the show notes, we'll share the results of this survey. Do these results match your expectations for what we were going to get back?
I think more or less. A couple things stand out that are like really people are excited about that I would have guessed maybe people be medium plus on. But I think overall, yeah, this kind of matches where I'd expect things to fall.
Overall, it's way more distributed than I would have expected. And I'll read the cards in a minute here, but there's 15 cards in the pool, and all but 3 received at least 1 vote for among the most powerful cards in the cube. All but 2 received at least 1 vote for among the least powerful cards in the cube, and every single card got a vote for most fun or least fun. There's just, not a lot of agreement.
Yeah, that's true. I think that part isn't actually surprising to me, that there is a lot of contentiousness and disagreement about what these cards are. And I think that the ones that are getting really high ratings are things that specifically have seen some success in, cubes online or in standard or other formats like that. So they are just cards that are more visible and in the public eye.
Yeah, one thing I think is a factor here is that I provided the caveat when I posted it in all these places that the context was my Bun Magic Cube. Frankly, I think a lot of the respondents either don't know the list, didn't take a time to look at the list. Obviously people in our playgroup do. They've played the cube before, so I think in my head, I kind of took their feedback a little more strongly than randoms on the internet. But some of the comments and votes definitely led me to believe that perhaps people did not really understand the environment.
Yeah, that also doesn't surprise me. I think that people
People love to respond to a question.
People love to respond to a question.
Fill in a
and
blank.
It's also just really, really hard to get that context. Like, and even if you did, like,
Right.
I'm going to sit down and spend half an hour reading through this list and trying to get a sense of what's going on. There's so much nuance
still
that
gonna
you're
miss
not
stuff.
going to be able to understand how things change. I mean, little things like how much life do you expect to be losing off of your shock lands in a typical game of your cube, I think is like a big factor that's going to influence the power level of some of these cards, or the precise amount of removal that's going to be able to hit certain creatures of particular sizes, or the speed of the fastest aggro decks and what that means about like how powerful a 3-drop needs to be just to keep pace. These are things that take a lot of experience to get a really good intuition about, and you're not necessarily going to be seeing that just by reading through the list. Which, again, most people are not going to do that either, because that's
Right.
a big ask.
It's much easier to just respond to a tweet. And God knows I've responded to so many of Ryan Sachs's about looking at the cube and just been like, yeah, I take this out of this pack, and that's the worst card in the pack. Because, I mean, that's part of what I was looking for, right, is initial impressions. Because, people draft my cube for the first time every once in a while, and those people are going to have largely the same card evaluations probably of people that have never played it on Twitter or whatever. So that perspective is still valuable. I haven't decided how many of these cards I'm going to add to the cube, Anthony. I think talking through it, we can maybe figure it out. So I'm not going to read the rules text or card names for all of them. They'll all be in the show notes. I'll put them all in the show notes on the cards mentioned page. For every episode of the show, we make a web page that lists all the cards we talked about in chronological order. For this episode, maybe it'll be a little different. Instead of chronological order, it'll be, grouped by the different groups we were talking about them, probably just in color order inside of there. But we'll put all the cards there. Let's talk about the outliers, though. So one of the most clear, decisive cards that pulled ahead in this poll is Adeline, Resplendent, and Cathar was in the poll, and almost everybody agreed that Adeline was among the most powerful cards of these 15 3-drops that I'm considering for my cube. Adeline's like this new Brimaz, I guess, for lack of a better word to describe it. Honestly, I think in spoiler season, I and a lot of people maybe underrated her a little bit because of the similarity to Brimaz. But she has a couple important differences. So very similar stats, very similar casting cost. The two main differences are that she gives you a token whenever you attack your opponent, which means that if you have other creatures in play and you play her on turn 3 and attack your opponent, you get that token immediately. So some value in the face of sorcery speed removal. You got at least one token out of it. The other big difference is her power scales with the number of creatures you have in play, which I think some people were like, it's kind of a wash. She's like way worse on an empty board. She only hits for 1, blah, 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 blah. But she hits for 2 by the time she actually gets in because, the token enters the battlefield. But I do think in most situations that is going to be a lot better than the 3 power that's stapled to Brimaz. So I think this card's a lot better than Brimaz and kind of exactly what I'm looking for in terms of a powerful, but mostly Baneslayer card, right? Like, this is a card that you definitely want to remove. You feel good if you remove it. It's not one of these 3-drops that someone plays and you just feel like, ugh, my removal's no good against that.
Sure. I mean, also just that huge toughness is relevant in aggressive matchups as well.
And Vigilance. I mean, Vigilance is really relevant
Yeah.
there as well. So get 3 votes for least fun card in the pack, which was middle of the pack in terms of cards with votes for least fun. I think people mostly did that because she's just powerful, and there's people that don't love playing with powerful cards, and they're like, that one's too good. It's not fun.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm making up a little bit of a story here, but I can imagine that
Purely speculation, yeah.
for a lot of people, like playing cubes, the fun part is living the dream, like doing the big fun, big splashy stuff twice in there.
Big.
Bing, bong, bong, bing, bing, bing.
I think that a lot of people would refer to the very aggressive decks as like the fun police. It's like, okay, you're here so I can like not necessarily do the most greedy, splashy stuff. And this being a powerful card is definitely something that comes out and feels like, oh, well, now I'm taking extra damage more than I expected because this is making a token right away, and power's gonna get huge, and it's just going to make this game really, really hard. So I can see why people hypothetically have that kind of experience with the card.
Yeah. I don't even remember. Are your votes up here? Did you vote on these, or did you just ignore it?
I think I voted on these, didn't I?
I don't know. If you did, I added it,
Great
but
question.
if you didn't. Do you agree that Adeline is among the most powerful cards in this pack?
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, what I'm talking about...
I said
sort of,
pack. It's not actually a pack. You know what I mean.
The public eye, I feel like this is even something that, Ryan Overturf called out in his introduction to the Arena Cube as being one of the most powerful cards that really defines the mono-white archetype in that cube. So I agree it's very powerful, and it's a thing that people know is powerful, which I think is almost as important as far as, like, interpreting these poll results.
Yeah, I agree, too. I think it's in the top 3 most powerful cards. I was surprised it was this decisive. I'm actually not entirely certain. I didn't keep track of the number of people that voted, and some people didn't vote in all, like didn't give me 3 for each category. So I don't actually know the exact number of people that voted. I think it was around 25. And Adeline got 21 votes for among the most powerful, so almost everybody agreed that Adeline was the most powerful card in the pack, or among them. And then Love Struck Beast was the second most powerful, according to this poll. That's, the adventure creature where you get a sorcery to make a 1/1, and then it's 3 mana for a 5/5 that can't attack unless you control a 1/1. I've always thought this card is really good. I've previously not included it because it feels just a little bit too amazing against aggro. Like, even if they get rid of the 1/1,
just a wall.
It's still just a 5/5 wall for 3, which at some point later in the future you play another 1/1 and it can attack. So, as much as I love adventure creatures, and I do love adventure creatures, I'm hesitant to sort of run that one for those reasons, but that's part of why I did this poll, to see if anybody thought Love Struck Beast was fun, and the answer is no. Everyone agreed Love Struck Beast was pretty powerful, but also pretty unfun, with 5 votes for among the least fun in the pack. Only 2 people voted Love Struck Beast as being fun. So these results, for this particular card, didn't surprise me too much, and it sort of reinforces my desire to not run it. So, spoiler alert, we're going to take Love Struck Beast off the table, not going in the cube. There was a big drop-off in power level to the card with the third most votes for most powerful card in the pack, and that's Thief of Sanity, which has 6 votes. And that's where we get into the category of people that I just don't think really know what the Bun Magic Cube is all about, because this is actually one of the only cards in this set of 15 cards that was in the Bun Magic Cube for a long time. It never did anything. It was never noteworthy. I never saw anybody go off with it, because I have so many shocks, disfigures, lava darts, just little removal spells to get rid of small stuff. And this thing, you does have to attack and get in to get any value off of it. It has to hit your opponent, basically. It's also really bad when you're stabilizing. If you're against an aggro opponent, it does nothing to help you stabilize. You basically have to stabilize with all your other cards because your Wind Drake's not really going to help you. So I was very surprised that people thought this was among the most powerful cards in this set. And maybe more surprisingly, maybe not actually, but this card was extremely divisive in the fun category. It is tied for the most votes for most fun card in the set, and it also is tied for the most votes for least fun card in this set. So people basically think that it's really fun to be playing Thief of Sanity and really unfun to be playing against it, which...
Yeah, you know what's really fun? Playing your opponent's cards. You know what really isn't fun? Having your opponent play your cards.
Yeah, I suppose. It's funny because I have that reaction with Gonti. I really don't like playing against Gonti. For some reason, I don't know. Thief doesn't feel quite the same to me. In all cases, I would prefer
Gonti is, I think, more tilting sometimes because you don't know what the card is. So there's a little bit of a question of...
There's that. There's that, and there's also... I just find it's a 2/3 Death Touch, right, Gonti?
Mm-hmm.
I just find that to be
Death
a really,
kind of
really
just like
frustrating
a
line. Yeah.
That's true. I think there's also... It's also a very high variance card because you're going to hit a bunch of random cards off your opponent's deck and you don't necessarily know what it's going to do, which is both a lot of fun. Like the most fun moments with it where you get exactly what you need is going to be great, but it also can kind of not do anything if you just hit cards that aren't going to be relevant. I think that this card had a very high profile time while it was in Standard, which definitely tints the way people are looking at it and it makes it look like a more powerful card.
I was surprised by the votes for most fun on this one a little bit, and definitely a lot of people in our play group were like, I love playing with that card. I think it's amazing. So that is an argument to maybe try it out again. I'm not taking it off the table completely, but for the reasons mentioned, I am skeptical that it is among the most powerful. I would put it pretty easily in the least powerful set of 3 cards from the cards we're talking about today, which only one other person did on the poll. So I really differ in my evaluation of this card from the people that were polled. The variance being fun thing was one of the things I observed from this pack. So Thief of Sanity got a lot of votes for most fun, tied with Shardless Agent, which is kind of pure randomness in a drafted context.
I think that falls in a similar situation where it is very high variance, which is both very fun or very tilting depending on how it goes. And I think person's tastes, if they enjoy that variance as much.
Maybe I'm just in weird bubbles, but I always had the impression that Magic players did not like that kind of variance.
I think we do. I think we tell ourselves we don't, but we do.
We're just lying to ourselves, basically.
And I think this is good evidence. So it's when you play Shardless Agent, it is fun, even if you don't think of it in that sense of it's fun because of the variance.
I don't think it's fun. I don't think it's fun to hit a Llanowar Elves off my Shardless Agent, or to not be able to put counter spells in my blue deck. To be clear, Shardless Agent also got a lot of votes for least fun, so it's very divisive, just like Thief of Sanity is.
Right.
So I can understand that. I'm just surprised so many people find it fun, I guess. Which, again, this is why I did this poll, right? I see why Ryan does these all the time. It was very illuminating to see what people thought about all these cards. The sort of next big outlier here was the second most fun card, once you ignore the 2 that are tied for first, and that's Anji's Ravager. This is a 3-drop, 3/3 that has to attack every turn. It's got madness for 1 and a red, and when it attacks, you discard your hand and draw 3 cards. So a really good aggro top-end card if you can stick an attack with it, because you're going to have presumably less than 3 cards left in your hand by the time you've untapped with your 3-drop in your aggro deck, so you just get to draw cards for days with this thing. Also synergizes, obviously, with all the discard stuff, so it itself has madness, and if you have other cards that care about being discarded, then it discards cards when it attacks. So this, I did not expect people to say was the most fun card, but not only do people say that a lot, it's only 1 vote behind Shardless Age and Thief of Sanity, but some people emphasized, like, this is the most fun Magic card I've ever played with. It is never coming out of my cube. Wow. I love this card more than anything. And from all the cards we were talking about today, this is one that I'm going to say for sure I'm definitely putting in the cube just to try, just because of how strongly people advocated for it, how fun people think it is, and people do think it's pretty powerful. It's only 1 vote behind Thief of Sanity in terms of perceived power level, and only 1 person voted it not fun. So this to me seems like a win across the board.
It's the least unfun card of all of these cards.
Yeah, it's true. Every other card has at least 2 votes for being in the least fun set of 3, and Anji's Ravager is sitting there with 1. So it's the most fun. I did a little like dumb math over here, and I gave them fun ratings that I then calculated, and Anji's Ravager, by far the most fun card.
I mean, this card is very cool. I think that it is similarly exciting. Like, it has this payoff that you're trying to get to, and it's not super hard to, basically empty your hand to be able to get that value.
Especially not in this cube. I mean, this cube is really low curving. So
totally. But I feel like it's not in the same way that Thief of Sanity is kind of feels more zero-sum fun, where if you're doing the thing, your opponent's really not doing the thing. It doesn't feel as oppressive for your opponent to get up on a couple cards, doing something that took a little bit of setup. And Madness is a beloved mechanic, so adding that on there, in a way that also it works with other Madness cards as well, makes a lot of sense that is appealing.
And I don't have, I would say, like a discard theme in my red section. I don't often think in those terms. I do have a fair number of cards that incidentally discard. I do have Famous Looting. I do have Seasoned Pyromancer. I have cards that will discard things, so definitely possible to Madness this out, but it's not like this is going to be the linchpin of a discard deck. I think one of the reasons this card ranked highly is because it was an overperformer in Caleb Gannon's cube, which a lot of people in the cube world really loved and followed closely. And I wonder if it's a strong performance there and on streams of that cube and whatnot is part of the reason why people are excited about it today. I don't care what the reason is. People are this high on it. I'm excited to just try it out because it serves my goal of trying to make my removal a little better against my 3-drops, because this is pretty fine against removal. It doesn't have haste, so you've got some time to untap, remove it before it gets to attack. Unless they Madness in instant speed, in which case they deserve it, because they did all the work to get there.
Yeah, you deserve that. What is interesting about it, though, is that it was printed originally in a Commander set, which I feel like those cards often get much less visibility than a lot of others. So that's maybe the one thing that surprises me about how positive the reaction is there.
Which maybe even speaks higher to how much fun the card is to play with. If,
fair.
If it doesn't have any kind of standard history to bolster it, or doesn't have any limited draft history to bolster it, and people are still this excited about it, then perhaps speaking pretty highly. So the third most popular card, in terms of fun, was a card that also got a ton of votes for being the least powerful card in this set, and that's Ironcrag Pyromancer. That's the 3-mana 0/4 that when you draw your second card each turn, you can bolt something, and it is any target, which is important.
I mean, we know why this is fun. Drawing cards is fun.
Oh, for
Getting
sure.
rewarded for drawing your cards is fun. Bolting stuff is fun. Great.
Yeah, I think cards that trigger when you're doing your normal game plan are just kind of inherently fun. It has this like snowballing feel and just feels great to play with. So I think this card's very fun. I might rank it among the top 3 most fun cards for me even. The question is, how weak is it? Here's the thing about this card. I think people are overestimating how hard it's going to be to trigger this in the Bud Magic Cube. I think you will get to trigger it a lot. Mostly on your turn, sometimes on your opponent's turn with stuff like Brainstorm or just 2 instant speed cantrips. There's a lot of cantrips in this cube. So I think you'll get to trigger this a lot when you play it. I also think it's pretty sturdy to a decent amount of removal, having that 4 toughness. Again, a lot of my removal is burn and toughness-based removal. This is not going to get hit by Disfigure, by Ulcerate. You do have to have Revolt online before you can Fatal Push this thing. So it is going to demand a higher level removal spell than something like a Thief of Sanity, which kind of dies to a stiff wind. And I really do think bolting anything means that you can play it in an aggressive deck, or you can play it in a reactive deck, and it kind of fits both sides of the spectrum. Do you think this card would just never get played in my cube if I put it in there? No one's going to touch it. Not good enough.
I would not be surprised. It definitely is. I mean, it's something that
Because you play this in the regular cube.
Yeah, and admittedly it scales in such a way that it's not. It's even harder to trigger drawing. Well, it's a lot harder to trigger drawing that second card a turn. So you kind of have to work for it. And, plan to like save up your cantrips if you think you have this in your deck, or hopefully you'd know if you have this in your deck. So I think that's a big factor. But I do think if it does make it into people's decks, it'll surprise people a little bit. Because the other thing is you can't really attack with this because it has zero power, but you can bolt your opponent. So at some point, if you're at a board stall, you're
just kind of an unblockable 3/3 if you can continue to trigger it. That's powerful in terms of aggression for 3 mana if you can actually trigger it reliably.
Right.
This one I'm tempted to try, and my only reservation is just that no one would actually play it, which means that I've just kind of wasted a slot in the cube because I've put a thing in there that no one's going to play. That's my only reservation about playing cards that are below the power level spectrum. It's not that I am worried people are going to play bad cards and have a bad time. It's that I'm worried they won't get played at all, and then I learn nothing, and it just kind of rides people's sideboards for the rest of time. But I'm tempted by it because I do think it's fun. Everyone else agrees it's fun. And I wonder if I can turn some of these least powerful votes at least around to it's fine. I don't think it's going to be broken. It's like I don't think it's anywhere near as good as the other Spells Matter triggers in my cube. And just to be very clear about why that is, it's because it costs 3 mana. 3 mana is 33% more than 2 mana, which is where you get your Young Pyromancers and whatnot in your Third Path Iconoclasts. And so being 33% more expensive means that it's going to come down at least one turn, sometimes more than one turn later. You don't always have your third land drop. And it's going to be really hard to play this and also have an immediate second draw to trigger it the turn it comes down until you're on at least 4 mana, and then we're talking the late game, basically, in my cube. Once you're at 4 lands, it's kind of like the late game in my environment. Those are my reservations, but I don't know. It's interesting. It appeals to me a little bit. Here's a card I'm curious to pick your brain on, Anthony. We talked about how fun it is to trigger stuff, how fun it is to get rewarded for your deck doing its thing. A card I included in this list is Tauren's Fist of the Angels. This is a Selesnya gold card, 3 mana for a 2/2. It's got training, and it says whenever you cast a creature spell, you make a 1/1 green and white human soldier token with training. It's kind of like the green-white young Pyromancer?
Yeah, I'll buy that. I mean, it's triggering off of the thing that green and white is doing, and It's having the similar effect of making a bunch of tokens. It's different in that tokens actually have a relevant keyword, and it can really scale and get out of hand.
A 2/2 token is so much better than a 1/1 token.
Yeah. So I think this card is quite powerful. I think it merits being a gold card in this environment. But how aggressive do you think, how much do you think this fits with specifically what green-white decks in this environment are trying to do?
That question is founded on the fact that I might know what green-white decks in my environment are supposed to do. And the answer is that I would like this to be what green-white decks in my environment want to do. I would say right now it's probably not that. What my dream would be to have the green-white decks play like old-school Maverick Legacy decks, which were low-to-the-ground creature decks. They were aggressive. They didn't play Collected Company in Legacy, but I think Collected Company kind of fits in an archetype in my cube here. Basically, curve stopping around 3, so you're not ramping. You're not playing Mana Dorks, except for maybe the Mana Dorks that give you Exalted.
Shaman.
Well, the Deathrite Shaman and the Exalted ones I think are worth it, because if you plan on attacking, then your Noble Hierarch is a little more of just a Mana Dork. But so anyway, a curve stopping at like 3, probably not playing a lot of ramp, but just really dense on high-value creatures. Your Thalias, which, I mean, Thalia looks great in an environment where you actually have a bunch of creatures in your deck. I think one of the things that I've noticed is that so many of my decks do have a decent density of non-creatures that Thalia really only gets played in mono-white decks, and even then there's a decent amount of non-creatures in that deck. I think the most creature-heavy color combination can be green-white in my environment. So that's kind of what I want green-white to be doing. I guess my question is, so this only got 2 votes for being among the most fun. It also got 2 votes for being among the least fun. I kind of suspect, again, this is pure speculation, I kind of suspect the 2 votes for the least fun is just presuming that they're never going to get to trigger it and it's going to die and it's going to be bad.
I mean, or is it people that fit into our hypothesized or imagined people about Adeline Resplendent Cathar, where this card does really, it comes down early and it can really put a lot of pressure on you. So if you don't like playing against aggressive decks, I could see that being another reason to give it a tick in the unfun box.
I suppose, but why do you think so many more people find Ironcrag Pyromancer fun rather than Tauren's?
When they're both like doing the same thing in terms of like rewarding you for doing what you already want to be doing.
And I do want to say that
casting creatures and attacking.
Right, and I do want to say that I do think triggering on creature spells is fundamentally worse than triggering on non-creature spells in my environment, because I have a lot of cantripping non-creature spells. It's much easier to go non-creature spell into non-creature spell into non-creature spell. I would also guess that my curve is lower for my non-creature spells than my creature spells, so your deck is full of 1-mana non-creature spells. Is your creature deck really full of that many 1-mana creatures? You probably have 2 drops and 3 drops, so how many times you're actually going to get to trigger Torrens a bunch. I do think it's worse on power level than something that is like a young Powermancer. But I think it's still defensible. I think it could totally work. I didn't put any cards in this list that I think are non-starters in my cube, except for maybe Thief of Sanity, but as proven by people disagree with me there. So I just don't know why people find this to be so unfun.
It's a good question. I don't have an answer for that. I do think, though, that like we've talked about with some gold cards in the past, they really can have a big influence on the way that people draft a cube. I'm thinking specifically about things like Uro and Oko, where prior to those cards, we didn't really see people playing green-blue that often, but as soon as those were printed, even when people didn't have them in their deck, we saw a lot more people playing blue-green because it changed the metagame a little bit in the way that people thought about that color pair by just having this, signpost card to pull them in.
And right now, people are not treating Knight of the Reliquary the same way. I would say, honestly, the green-white decks in my cube right now tend to be more than just green-white because they're playing Knight of the Reliquary as part of a lands package, and the lands deck often wants a Golos, it often wants a couple other pieces, and is maybe doing some greedy splashes for Ren and 6 and stuff like that. And so that's what I think green-white is mostly doing in my cube right now, but that's not what Knight of the Reliquary has to do. It can just be a 3-mana 6/6 or whatever.
Right, and I mean, as soon as I see Torrens, then I'm thinking, well, do I want to combine this with cards like Quirion Beastcaller and Augur of Autumn and really do more of a creature-centric kind of strategy.
Which is why I included both of those cards, is I did want to reward people for playing creatures and just make a creature deck. So I don't know. I think I like Torrens. I would probably put this among
Do you like it enough to make a whole commander deck about it?
I do, in fact, have a Torrens commander deck. That's true. I would probably put this among the most fun cards in this pack for me, up there with Ironcrag Pyromancer. So that's saying something. Honestly, I think the results that I took most seriously from this poll was just cards that got the fewest votes, period, across the board. And Torrens was in that category. I think he got the fewest votes of any card. He only has 6 votes in any categories, which basically means that people don't think about him at all, right? It's the classic Don Draper insult.
I feel bad for you.
I don't think about you at all.
Which I think is the worst thing you could say about a card in this context, right? Like, I would so much rather have a card that people think is bad, and maybe they jam in their deck sometimes to try it out, than a card they're just like, whatever, this is nothing to me. It's invisible.
I mean, I don't know, because when you have cards like that, it's sometimes fun when your opponent plays them, and you're like, oh, I never even thought about that. That's kind of a cool experience.
I guess you could optimistically think of people as like a blank slate on Torrens, and I can shape their impression by letting them play in the Bun Magic
That's a little
Cube.
more optimistic.
But that's not how I feel. I feel like, oh, you just ignored them? Then those are the cards I at least want to play. In a very similar category to Torrens is probably the most pet card of mine in this list, and that's Managorger Hydra. I love Managorger Hydra.
It's fun. It rewards you for doing the thing you want to do, and it also rewards you for your opponent doing the thing that they want to do.
And it was like one of the first Magic cards that I played with when I got back into the game that had that kind of play pattern, and I experienced that like rush of snowballing joy. Managorger Hydra, for those who don't know, it's 2 and a green for a 1/1 with trample, and whenever any player casts a spell, it gets a +1/+1 counter. I got a lot of mana dorks in green. I think on turn 2, this is extremely scary, and you only have a very narrow window to actually kill it with a Disfigure or a Shock, because as soon as you cast the first one, it's a 2/2, and so if any spell has been cast before that, you casting your Disfigure or Shock is going to make it a 3/3 before your spell resolves. So it does very quickly get out of the range of a lot of the burn and toughness base removal, which can make it kind of sticky. It's not a great top deck. I'm not going to lie. It's a pretty bad top deck. But that said, I also thought for a long time that Sprite Dragon was a terrible top deck, and I've been proven wrong by that. But part of the reason I've been proven wrong by that is because the non-creature spells are so easy to chain together, and are you really chaining together a bunch of cantrips in your Managorger Hydra deck? I don't know. I don't know where this card goes. I just really love this card, and I want to jam it in the cube, but as votes indicate, people are probably pretty unlikely to play it, because it got the second most votes for least powerful in the cube, and was completely split on most and least fun. 4 votes in both categories for most and least fun, so a divisive card on the fun side of things, and pretty universally panned in terms of power level.
Wow. You hate to see it.
What do you think of this card?
I totally agree that this is a cool card. I mean, it's I love it just because it's like such a simple, clean design. Trample's very effective, and when this card gets really, really huge, Trample's going to matter a lot in a lot of board states. So yeah, I'm absolutely in this is the fun card.
Yeah, that's right in there in that category with Ironcrag Pyromancer, where it's just like, am I wasting my time by even putting this in the cube because no one's going to play it? But I want to.
I mean, it's probably in a similar
really
situation where I think it won't get played that often, but when it does, there's going to be plenty of board states where it's like, wow, that card is just unbeatable now. Those being the one you described, where you play it on turn 2, and then your opponent only has...
specifically against like a red deck,
right.
Red-green or something, a deck that just doesn't have a way to deal with something once it gets too big. I don't know. I'm a little bummed that so many people thought it was least powerful, but I did expect that. I expected it to get a lot of votes for least powerful. Honestly, I was very surprised that the card that beat it for votes for least powerful was Egon, God of Death, which I think is pretty good in my cube. I would put it like middle of the pack of all these cards we're talking about. I feel like that, again, is people maybe not understanding this environment because you're putting so many cards in the graveyard in decks in my cube that it is not hard to defeat Egon. It's kind of just a 3-mana 6/6 Death Touch.
Which is kind of similar, honestly, to Lovestruck Beast and just being a huge body that's way undercosted.
And Lovestruck Beast was the second most powerful card according to people. So I think that those votes are also maybe a little bit out of place with what my environment is meant to be doing. So if you kind of ignore those votes, then Managorger Hydra is the least powerful according to people, right up there with Ironcrag Pyromancer. So those ones kind of break my heart. I wonder if I can cut enough cards from the cube that people will be kind of forced to play them, where they'll be like, well, I don't really want to, but I need a 3-drop in my deck because I've got Collected Company or whatever, so I guess Managorger Hydra get in there.
I mean, you just put a $5 bill in the sleeve.
There's only like one more card I want to talk about here, and the rest don't really have any results that I think warrant discussion. But the last one I want to talk about is Anointed Peacekeeper. This is 2 and a white for a 3/3. This is a card from Dominaria United, relatively new. It's got Vigilance, and when it enters the battlefield, you get to look at your opponent's hand, and then you choose a card, and spells of that name cost 2 more to cast, and activate abilities of cards of that name cost 2 more to activate. It's just like a very flexible hate card that I think really fits well with the disruptive plan that white has. And a 3/3 Vigilance is a very respectable stat line. Hits a lot harder than most of the other hate bears in the hate bears deck. I know it's not a bear, but hate bears has become a more broad term, I would say, at least more broad in usage. So I think this is one of the better cards in the pack. It did not get a ton of votes for power or fun, but generally the votes were somewhat positive, even though it's kind of not outstanding in any category.
I don't know how I missed this card for the Turbo Cube is what I'm thinking.
Oh, yeah. That'd be pretty good in the Turbo Cube Hate Bears deck.
It's also very funny because it's just like, you don't get to turbo this card.
Yes.
This card
is removed from the turbo. The turbo is gone.
I love that.
You should write a different name on it where it's like Anointed Turbo Taker or something. Anyway, that's the other card that interests me out of these cards. So let's just get down to brass tacks. Which of these cards am I actually going to include in my cube? I mentioned already that I'm putting Anji's Ravager in there, so I'm just going to go ahead and I've got a little screen here. I'm just going to move Anji's Ravager down to a new section of cards that I'm going to include in the cube. Definitely going to test Anji's Ravager. I'm excited about it. I'm glad it seems like most other people are excited about it too. The next card I'm most inclined to test. You want to guess what it is?
Managorger Hydra. You said that was absolute necessary.
No, the next one I'm most inclined to test is Adeline, just because
fair.
Even though it's not like a standout fun card, I don't find it to be sparking a ton of joy. It is, I think, clearly powerful enough for my environment, and also very clearly fits the bill of what I'm trying to do, which is just put more 3-drops in my cube that are bad against removal. And so it fits the bill too nicely, and it very clearly is going to see play, so I think that's also worth an inclusion. Now we're down to really the considerations being like Tauren's, Anointed Peacekeeper, Managorger Hydra, Ironcrag Pyromancer. Do any of those speak to you?
I mean, I would definitely say Tauren's, both because it is a card that is fitting the sort of needs and description that you're looking for, but also I think it has the potential to restructure the way people are thinking about a certain color pair, which I think has the highest ceiling on just creating more interest in the environment.
This is part of why I want to do this episode. I think it's interesting to talk through the thoughts you have when trying to consider ads, and I do consider the fact that it's a gold card to be a little bit of a cost here. Even if people do want to play it in their green-white deck, sometimes there won't be a green-white deck present, and so it's going to be harder, I think, to get a read on whether this card is any good, especially if when the green-white deck is there, people still don't play it because they're like, that's not even a good card for me. And to put myself in the seat of a drafter, when Tauren's wheels, which it's going to wheel to you, the green-white drafter, and it's in the pack next to a B 2-drop in green or white, is it going to be worth taking Tauren's over
Quirion Beastcaller?
Well, yeah, I mean, that'd be a shame because I want them both being the same deck, but over your Quirion Beastcaller or Tarmogoyf or Sun Gold Sentinel, one of these cards that's like a strong performer that's just in the monocolor. And I don't know if Tauren's is good enough to really get there. And that's a test that none of these other cards have to pass, right? Like, the other cards here have to only compete with the cards of one color in the pack, right, when they wheel. Tauren's has got to compete with the cards in 2 colors because you need to be both in order to play it.
Yeah, for sure.
Thinking out loud, the next card that I think is most likely to perform is Anointed Peacekeeper. I think that is probably the next most powerful card of these 4 we're still considering. I don't really want to add 2 white cards, to be perfectly honest. I feel like I'm already plenty deep on the white 3-drop slot, and I've already looked a little bit at cuts I intend to make, which we'll talk about in this episode as well. And there's not really any room for me to shave stuff from the white section either, because I like all those cards a lot. So
You could just make the cube bigger.
we're not doing that today. All right, well, you know what? Let's just jam Torrents. I'm sold by that.
Great,
I'm
we did
going to jam Managorger Hydra. I'm going to jam Ironcrag Pyromancer. And here's ultimately my logic. You can always undo it, right? If I cut a card I liked for one of these cards and it doesn't do anything over the next couple drafts, I can just undo it. These are cards that I am excited about enough that I want to see what happens. So these 5 cards, I'm going to say, are getting added to the Bun Magic Cube. That is Anji's Ravager, Adeline Resplendent Cathar, Tauren's Fist of the Angels, Managorger Hydra, and Ironcrag Pyromancer.
You can't cut something for Egon?
I don't actually like Egon that much.
Oh, okay.
I think it's powerful, but first of all, it's a double-sided card, and the
True.
backside has no text, basically, in this environment. You're really not doing that, I don't think, in this cube ever. Even though the showcase frame looks really, really freaking cool,
It does.
and I bought a foil showcase one when it came out because I just wanted to own one because it's beautiful, I'm not going to go there, I don't think.
So what about Thief of Sanity? It is, so we're talking about some of these cards are maybe, you're concerned they're just not going to make it into people's decks. It
Yeah.
sounds like if people are reacting the way that they are to Thief of Sanity, it will make it into people's decks,
I think it
even
will.
though you think it's not going to perform well.
I think it's going to make it in people's decks, and it's going to get disfigured a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to eat a lot of dead weights and probably not do a whole lot. Yeah, I don't know. Also, I feel like I have quite a few black, blue, gold cards, and I don't strictly balance these sections. I don't really worry about it. I think I have like 7 blue-red ones and like 2 Golgari cards, so I'm not that sweating it. But when I do have 4 or 5, I'm like, do I really want to add more? The bar just gets a little higher for its inclusion at that point because I feel like I'm just pushing that color pair too much if there's too many cards in that color combination. It just so happens that a lot of Izzet cards for me clear that high bar, so that's why I have so many. So yeah, I'm not putting Thief of Sanity back in, to be honest. I think people are wrong about it.
So why'd you put it in this list? Was that just sort of a baseline setter?
It was because I was curious what people thought.
Okay.
And if the votes had come in and people thought it was powerful and everyone thought it was fun, instead of some people also thinking it's extremely unfun, I might be tempted to say, all right, well, prove to me it's viable. Here it is back in the cube. But the fact that so many people also thought it was unfun, it's like, is this really worth the cost of inclusion?
Sure. What if everybody had been like, yeah, this is not powerful, but it's really fun? Would you have been
Well, that's
more inclined?
Ironcrag Pyromancer.
Exactly, yeah.
I did put Ironcrag Pyromancer in the cube, so that's that. All right, so those 5 cards are getting added. I got 3 other cards I want to talk about that were not in my poll. I have 3 other 3-drops that I have come up with that I think are interesting. So the first is a card from Brothers War. It's Sky Strike Officer. We didn't talk about this in any of our review episodes. This is 2 and a blue for a 2/3 flyer, and whenever it attacks, you make one of those artifact soldier tokens. And then you can tap 3 untapped soldiers you control to draw a card. So it's like a weird combination of like kind of a Rabble Master because it attacks and makes tokens, kind of a Crypt Breaker because you can tap these tokens to draw cards eventually. It's in blue.
I think this is pretty cool. I think I actually have this on some list for some potential future cube projects. It does remind me a lot of Crypt Breaker in that it's like, here's this little mini game, get up to 3 soldiers, and maybe you can do that with other cards, or you can just use it to fuel itself, and then start drawing cards. Everyone's favorite thing to do.
I would love it if this card made people like draft a different kind of blue-white deck in my cube. That I think is totally there. I think there's, people draft the blue-red deck.
Sort of tempo, blue-white deck.
Right, people draft the blue-red deck, and its whole basis is like cheap, efficient creatures and, good interaction. And I think white is capable of almost exactly the same thing. And so this is a card I'm really tempted to try, and I don't know what people are going to think about it, but I'm putting it in the inclusion list too. The last 2 are kind of spicy. The Secret Lair Street Fighter thing came out like, I don't know, a year ago or something. And to be perfectly honest, I didn't look that hard at the cards because I knew in my heart that I'm not putting like Ken or Blanca in my cube. Nothing against people that are into this like other IP. It just felt wrong to me. It's not for me. I'm not into the whole Universes Beyond thing for the most part. And with this sort of latest weekly MTG stream where we saw some of the first Phyrexia All-Will-Be-One cards, they also unveiled the Universes Within versions of the Street Fighter cards, which is to say...
I gotta say, that's confusing as hell.
It's very confusing. These are just the same cards mechanically that have been reskinned in Magic lore, and they all represent new characters, right? It's not like they said, okay, well, we'll turn Ken into some variation of Jace or whatever. They're just new cards, new characters, so there's no, like, story or, like, lore that I'm aware of associated with them. but I am kind of interested in some of the mechanics. So the first one is Aisha of Sparks and Smoke. It's 1 red for a 4/2 with prowess. It has an activated ability for hybrid red or white. You can give it first strike to end of turn. And whenever it deals any combat damage, you can cast a sorcery with mana value equal to or less than the damage dealt. It's a very cool card, we should say. I think it's just very cool that you get to, like, threaten potentially casting free sorceries at instant speed in the middle of combat whenever this thing deals damage. The fact that it's got 4 power and the threat of activation of first strike means it's going to be really hard to block. Prowess makes it even bigger. I love casting non-creature spells, so I love prowess threats. I think the card's very cool.
Yeah, card's very cool. It does a lot of stuff.
Cool
it's
art, too.
And cool art. My least favorite part about it is that hybrid red-white. We know you already have red because you've cast the spell.
It's a little weird. I'm sure that has something to do with, like...
It's only so it has a bigger
Street
color.
Fighter?
No, just
that's
color
Commander.
identity
You're
for
totally
Commander.
right. It's exactly Commander.
Which is,
Yeah, that is kind of weird, huh?
Anyway, yeah, it's very cool. I mean, I love power matters, and like prowess. There's like a lot of interesting lines of play I could see with this. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of like you're damned either way because you kind of want to block it, but then you're gonna lose most of your creatures to this first strike. But if you don't block it, then they're casting sorcery for free.
Just to be clear, you can cast stuff for free whenever it deals any damage, not to your opponent.
Oh, never mind. Then
So you do it when it hits their creatures,
You're
too.
just in a bad way. I'm sorry.
And it's got really cool play patterns here where you can give it first strike, which means it'll do damage
Right,
first,
yep.
and then you can cast a sorcery speed removal spell or something to change combat and some other sort of blocking that's going on. I think it's a little weird that it could only cast sorceries. Like, my intuition was like, oh, surely you can cast instants and sorceries. The same way your intuition was, surely this only triggers if it deals damage to my opponent.
Right.
Those two things being maybe what people don't expect on a card with a lot of text.
Right, well, so you can build your Sorceries Matter Commander deck, and you're suddenly doing something slightly different.
Okay, look, don't be that salty about Commander, okay? Get over it.
No, I mean, I legitimately think that's probably a design consideration, is they want you to care about, like, a different slice
No,
of
it is.
the history
It
of
is for
Magic
sure.
cards, and that is reasonable and probably a good way for them to design Commanders.
I think this card might suffer from a different effect than we've talked about, which is that people have not seen this card. It's never going to be played in Standard. It's never going to be played in... Well, I shouldn't say that. I think it's unlikely it's going to show up in any Eternal format. It's only legal in Legacy. I don't think it's going to cut it in Legacy. It's got a lot of text on it, too, and it's got unfamiliar art. I think a lot of people are just going to straight up ignore this card. They are not going to read it in the pack.
Yeah, people are definitely going to skip over cards that are unfamiliar, especially when they're unfamiliar and wordy.
Also, I can punt on this decision, to be clear, because these don't actually come out in paper for some amount of time. I don't know when. I think in collector's boosters for Phyrexia all will be one, so maybe in like a month. I don't know. These are not available
You want
yet.
to borrow a Ken?
No, I do not want to borrow a Ken. The other Universes Within card that I am actually pretty darn into is Zethi Arcane Blade Master. Also a 3-drop. It's 1 white-blue for a 3/3. It has multi-kicker, hybrid white or blue, and here the hybrid makes a lot more sense, I would say, mechanically, because you can play multi-kicker as many times as you want. It's basically making
That's
it
true.
easier for you to cast it. When it enters the battlefield, for every time it was kicked, you exile an instant from your graveyard with a kick counter on it. Let's ignore that one line that has to do with the Street Fighter flavor. And whenever it attacks, you get to copy all of the exiled cards and just cast them. Also sick! It's so sick!
Sorry, I have to read this a couple times and process it.
I think the most realistic situation is you're playing this in some kind of tempo deck. You play it on like 4 or 5, you exile a cantrip and a removal spell of some sort. Then every time you attack, you get to draw a card and Swords to Plowshares their thing or whatever. It's full-on Baneslayer territory, right? Like, you get no value on this until you, like, play it for at least 4. It's really a 4-drop. I called it a 3-drop, but you're not just playing it as a 3-mana 3/3 vanilla. You have to exile something for it to be worth it at all. So it's really a 4-drop or more, 4 or 5-drop. But if you get to untap with this, it's like the coolest Baneslayer ever. It's like a build-your-own Titan almost. Like, it reminds me a little bit of like Uro or Kroxa, where it's like every time you attack, you get to do this thing, and it's like got 2 halves to it. But here it's like whatever you got in your deck, you can just make it do whatever you want.
Or it's a lot like Ethereal Forager as well, like the combination of caring about instant sorceries in your graveyard and then being able to recast them. Obviously, this just lets you recycle the same ones every single turn, which makes it more like I'm assembling this cool Voltron creature, which is going to have a different effect depending on what I've been able to do earlier in the game. Yeah, it's a pretty cool card.
And I think Ethereal Forager is probably the stronger card, but it's got a way lower ceiling, right?
Right.
You know, like, the thing about Ethereal Forager is that it's like fine, you get to like attack and draw a spell, but that's all you get. That's the best you do. It does have flying, which is nice. You get to attack a little more, but I think this is going to have just a much, much higher ceiling. If you top deck this and you're like have a bunch of extra mana.
Yeah, I mean, there'll be games where it's just like, I'm just going to cast this for six or seven.
And now it's like, whenever I attack, I get to cast my whole deck. And it does cast them, so it's going to trigger all of the spells matter stuff you have in your deck. You're just going to get 4 spellcast triggers.
Hey, wait a minute. Do you have to pay for the copies? Uh-oh. Did I ruin this card for you?
Oh, damn. You got to pay for the copies. Well, we'll keep this in here because it's fun for everyone to hear us get stuff wrong. Okay.
I read it a couple times, but that wasn't enough.
I also read it a couple times. So some checks in the minus column for this card. A, it's a lot worse than I thought. B, we both read it a couple times and still had it wrong. So this is maybe also going to suffer the same fate as Aisha of Sparks and Smoke. It's a lot less good when you have to pay for them. But also it makes sense. If you didn't have to pay for them, it would be such a good commander card. It would be disgusting. Anyway, 2 other cards I was thinking about. This episode's going a little long. Let's move on to cuts real quick. We don't want to spend a lot of time on this. Anthony, I pre-selected...
Hey, look, all cards that I like.
What? What are you talking about?
Well, never mind.
I pre-selected 10 cards from my cube that are, let's say, on the chopping block, and we're looking to put 6 in. The 10 cards I selected from the cube that I'm willing to cut, that are like the first ones I pulled out, were Flicker Wisp, Plague Engineer, Bloodthirsty Adversary, Earthshaker Kenra, Phoenix of Ash, Fiery Confluence, Call of the Herd, Jade Light Ranger, Pest Infestation, and Judge's Familiar. Now, I pulled these for very different reasons, but a lot of them are here because I am intentionally trying to cut down on the hard-to-remove threats, which is why we have Phoenix of Ash, a card that I adore, is here. I love this card. I really love Call of the Herd, but that's a cantripping 3-drop that draws you a 4-drop. It
doesn't work with Torrens.
Doesn't work with Torrens either. It's pretty bad against removal. Jade Light Ranger, pretty bad against removal. Might draw you 2 cards. These cards are just part of the problem that the play group has been feeling that I'm at least going to try and test an alternative approach to. Some other cards are here just because I think they're not quite good enough. Pest Infestation, honestly, I'm on so few artifacts and enchantments these days that this is kind of just a clunky Secure the Waste that sometimes has a little bit of upside. That card I don't think is particularly good. I think Judge's Familiar was a very ambitious ad of mine that I just loved playing so much in the Degenerate Micro Cube. I wondered if it could work in the Bun Magic Cube, and in reality, I think most people don't cast it. I don't ever see it and play that often, and even if they do, only hitting instants and sorceries is pretty narrow. The last card I think is just kind of bad here is Bloodthirsty Adversary. I've never seen this thing kicked ever. It's cool in theory that it could be a Goblin Dark Dwellers or just a 2-mana 2/2 haste, but in the aggressive red decks with a lot of spells, you don't get to 5 mana very often in my cube. So that card I think is like modal on paper, but all this big block of text is like so irrelevant that I think it's probably most likely to go. And then Plague Engineer is here because everyone hates it.
I'm surprised by that. I thought people really loved this card.
No.
Okay.
I posted a poll of these 10 cards and just said, name your most fun and least fun card in this pack. And literally every single person except for you said Plague Engineer. I'm not kidding.
Okay.
And then I said, okay. So least favorite card, it's not Plague
Except for
Engineer.
Plague Engineer.
And then people gave some other answers. But this card is widely hated. And I do understand why. And the reason is just that it's a good card you'll play in any black deck. You don't have to go out of your way to do it. And it will have this very swingy incidental effect on your opponent's deck, where it could just ruin their entire strategy incidentally. It's like, well, I played this card that's good all the time, and it happened to be amazing here, and whatever. I do think in my cube, I'm not that deep on the Savannah Lions aggro. People were like, it just dumpsters aggro. I think my aggro decks do have a lot of 2 toughest threats. They're more type diverse than a lot of other aggro decks are, because I'm not just playing a bunch of 1-mana 2/1 humans. But regardless, the impression of the card remains. So, Anthony, what should we cut? Or maybe we can say, what should we save? We only got 4 of these cards to save.
I mean, I would first save Flicker Wisp because that's
I actually
a cool
agree.
card.
I'm going to say Flicker Wisp too.
Fiery Confluence? I feel like people like Fiery Confluence.
I think people do like Fiery Confluence. The question is, do I like it? I don't know.
Wow.
It's a tough question. It is in this list just because I was like, this is a card that's a known quantity. I don't know if Cube has maybe outgrown this kind of card, but looking at this, I think it's definitely among the 3 cards I want to keep more. So we'll add that. So Flicker Wisp and Fiery Confluence are being saved from getting voted off the island.
I like Earthshaker Kenra a lot, but it does... Your explanation for cutting it does make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put a neutral there.
I guess the question is, do Earthshaker Kenra and Phoenix of Ash both have to go alongside Plague Engineer, Call of the Herd, Jade Light Ranger, Pest Infestation, all as good against removal cards? Or can we afford to keep one of them? If we're going to keep one of them, I would definitely want to keep the Phoenix over Earthshaker Kenra, just because I love that card. I don't know, this is hard. Honestly, I don't really want to keep any of these cards looking at it
all right,
now.
We can go back up to the top and let's go back to ads. Yeah, get Radha in there. She's cool.
Okay, well, we're gonna put
Slogurk.
Anointed Peacekeeper in here because that was a card I was on the fence about adding, and now we got 7 adds. We can only find one more card to save here. Oh, you know what? I got the perfect solution.
What's that?
There's one more card I want to add, which was not in any of this discussion, not in any of these lists, but I want to mention it on the show because I think people will have
Surprise
thoughts about
card.
it. I want to add Shoulder of the Apocalypse to my cube.
Oh yeah, you mentioned that.
I talked about it in the Discord briefly. I'm on record as not liking lifelink and repeatable life gain. And I gotta say, Anthony, I've had people coming up to me and saying, I never thought about it before, but then I opened my eyes to it, and I think you're right. I'm coming over to the church of repeatable life gain, and lifelink is not that great for gameplay. So I'm converting some people. You would think that I would never go near Shoulder with a 10-foot pole when I have this aversion to repeatable life gain, because Shoulder can gain an absolute ridiculous amount of life every time you draw a card, gains you 2 life. You play a Brainstorm, you play a Treasure Cues, you just get completely out of the range of any kind of deck that was trying to go under you. Here's my reasoning. It's like twofold. The first is, if Shoulder is in play for long enough for you to gain a decent amount of life off of the card, your opponent's just going to be dead, because they will have lost so much life for the opposite reason that the game is going to be over. And ultimately the reason why, let's say at least I'm cautious of adding repeatable life gain, is just because I don't like it to drag games out. And the fact that this happens to be stapled to a card that also just ends the game very quickly, I think makes that somewhat defensible. And my second reason is that it is a huge Baneslayer. It can just get removed. It's 4 mana, has no protection against removal except for that big 5 toughness, which will dodge a lot of the stuff in this cube. But ultimately, I'm trying to make the hard removal a little bit higher picks. I'm trying to make it better. I think a way to make removal better is to have things like Shoulder, which must be removed in your cube. And I also think people are excited about it. I think the card is cool and exciting, and people will be interested in putting it in their deck. Tear me apart.
Okay.
Do you think this is logically inconsistent? Do you think I'm like...
No, I think so.
You think I'm bending over backwards to try and justify how all of my decisions are actually logically consistent instead of just saying I'm doing this because I want to?
Sure. I think you could just do the second one. That'd be a few less steps. I mean, the card is powerful. I agree that if your real dislike is that you don't want games to drag on, then yeah, it's a card that is going to end games. I mean, for me, a big thing I don't love about life gain is just when you have spent a lot of effort on a plan, you spend a lot of multiple turns thinking about, like, what are my outs? Is there some kind of evasive threat I could draw or some burn spell, and then your opponent gains 3 life, and it's like, oh, okay, well, now my plan kind of doesn't really work. Those are
it does eliminate
experiences.
a lot of like cool outs in situations where you might be unfavored, but you still have some outs, and then the outs just go away as soon as your opponent is like,
Right.
I gained 6, and you're like, well, bye-bye outs, now I just lose.
Which I think that is a different thing, which still applies to Shieldred. But yeah, I mean, overall, I do agree. Like, the life gain matters cards that I like the most are when it interacts with things that are ultimately very proactive. I think that a Johnny's Pridemate is a great card design because it is all about being proactive, making a big body, and getting your opponent dead, and it's just using life gain as a resource, basically.
And it's also why you love Uro, because as you're gaining life, you're also killing your opponent with a big creature.
Yep, I love that. I love that card. So it's maybe not perfectly logically consistent, but do what you want. You don't need to justify it to anybody.
That is why I like Uro, because if you are gaining life repeatedly with Uro, you're also just winning the game in very short order. So it doesn't really matter if you gained a bunch of life. All right, this went long, and also I have less time this week to edit for reasons, so we're going to wrap the show up there. It's me in the editing booth again, and I know it doesn't look like the episode went long because you're looking at the length of the show, and it's only like an hour like normal, but that's because I cut a lot of nonsense out, so you're all welcome for that. Also, I had somebody tell me that I do these interjections like every third show, which I think is a drastic exaggeration, even though I have done it now in 3 of the last 4 shows. But as the show gets more popular, I get more people giving me corrections and telling me things that I missed and we messed up in the conversation. And so I hear them when I'm editing them, and I'm like, I got it. I can correct it so easily. I just pull this microphone over and I just say it. So maybe I'll keep doing this. I don't know. Maybe not. Real quick, we do have a survey out right now for the Jumpstart cards from 2022. So if you're interested in adding any of those cards to your cube, check out the survey. We'll link it in the show notes. It's, as always, on our website and a banner at the top.
It's a bunch of new cards. It's more than 50 new cards from that set.
So if you haven't looked at them too, I think some of them are pretty interesting. It's not like I think it should just be ignored. I know we do have a lot of people, we've asked before in the show, like, why do we think Commander sets would ever get so much fewer attention? A lot of people do just ignore non-standard product because they rely so much on standard and limited and stuff to actually help them evaluate cards. And They're not going to add stuff just blindly. And so, anyway, if you are testing cards from Jumpstart, make sure you fill it out because not that many people probably are, so you definitely want your vote to be in there. Also, we've been streaming, and it's been going great. We've been putting the streaming videos on YouTube, so you can check out our YouTube channel, which we'll also link in the show notes to see some of those videos if you can't catch the stream. If you can catch the stream, it's Monday nights starting around 6:30 Eastern, and the day this episode comes out, if you're listening to it the same day it comes out tonight, I think we're going to be playing decks that are rotisserie drafted from my cube on air with Theo, one of the better players in our play group. So those games promises to be a lot of fireworks because roto draft decks tend to be the most powerful way you can draft a cube aside from ridiculous stuff like you get 6 packs. And also we got Theo in the building, so should be fun.
Look forward to some very technical play.
Yeah, we'll miss less triggers because Theo will be there to point out the triggers instead of pointing out the missed triggers in the chat. We love you, Theo. That's it for this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. All the music is produced by DJ Dames Nasty. All the Magic cards are produced by Wizards of the Coast. This show is produced by me making a bunch of polls on Twitter and Discord to ask people what they think about cards and then talking over the results with my buddy Anthony. Thanks for indulging me in a hour-plus long conversation about which 3 drops I should put in my cube.
Yeah, I liked your spreadsheet. You had nice colors for the different values. Those are always fun.
I love using... Here's the thing. I love using emoji for stuff like this. So will be a screenshot or image in the show notes. You'll see that for the votes, I used emojis. Like there's a flexing arm for most powerful and angry guy for least fun. And then I use the len function to count the number of characters in the cell just so I can work with the numbers of the actual things.
That's very silly.
Well, but get this. The len function counts half the emoji as 2 characters and half as 1 character.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that.
Is it ones with a skin color? Is that what it is?
Unicode is a whole thing. Let's not.
Either way, so some of them I have to divide them by 2 in order for the numbers to be right.
We can do a whole episode about Unicode character encodings next week.
Yeah, so some numbers I have to just divide by 2 for fun. Let's see. Oh, I hit everything.
There's probably a different length function that will do what you actually want to do.
If there is, then I'm open to it. Yeah, so the muscly arm, got to divide it by 2. The weak X, no. The fun face, got to divide it by 2. The angry face, got to divide it by 2. So I think it is probably something to do with... There's no skin tone on the angry face, though. It's always red and spicy.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but
I don't know.
Stupid stuff in these dumb Google sheets that I make.
And stuff.